A wonderful good morning, good afternoon and good evening to our valued attendees from around the world. Welcome to our digital event Innovation Talk on the occasion of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. Under the headline, A Green Recovery Needs Green Innovations, the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research has lined up a top-level online panel discussion with renowned experts from various backgrounds to discuss challenges and highlight promising solutions. The future is in our hands, and I guess we all agree it's high time to take action. There is no time to waste, only 9 years left to meet the UN SDGs. And right now, we need science and innovation more than ever, not only to build a better, a more sustainable future for all, but also to build back better, or rather to build forward better after this global pandemic. And these past 1.5 years have confronted all of us with previously unimaginable challenges, but at the same time also revealed, created and shaped new opportunities and new possibilities which may not have occurred, or at least not yet, hadn't it been for exactly these challenges. And as Albert Einstein once said, we cannot solve our problem with the same level of thinking that created them. I'd say our common goal now is to seize new opportunities in order to tackle existing challenges. And the good news is, science and innovation does and did come up with brilliant ideas for a green recovery. The only question is that enough? Can we manage to achieve and reach our Agenda 2030 goals with the innovative solutions we already know about and have, or do we need more green research and sustainable innovations? And that's actually what I would like to know from you, ladies and gentlemen, before we officially kick off this event. And therefore, we have started a Slido poll. In case you're watching full screen, please close the full screen mode for a little moment. Then underneath the video, you will find the Slido poll. And first question is to get to know all of you a bit better. So I would like to know your professional background now. Are you from science, economy, politics, or civil society? Thank you very much. And now the decisive question. On a scale from 1 to 5, how do you rate the green innovation landscape? And this 1 would be no problem at all. We can easily achieve all the Agenda 2030 goals with the green innovations and solutions we already have and know about. Or 5, on the other hand, would be no, we definitely need more green research and sustainable innovations ASAP. Thank you very much. We will have a closer look at the results in just a moment, together with our expert panelists, of course. But first of all, I would like to hand over for the official opening speech to the Federal Minister of Education and Research, Mrs. Anja Karliczek. Madam Minister, your audience.
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, der Weltklimarat warnt uns auch in seinen jüngsten Veröffentlichungen wieder sehr deutlich. Wenn wir das 1,5 Grad Ziel verfehlen, werden wir mehr Hitzewellen erleben, werden mehr Menschen hungern müssen und werden auch mehr Arten sterben. Und die Experten sind sich einig. Menschen verursachen diese Krise und sie selbst leiden am meisten darunter. Aber, und das unterstreiche ich, wir Menschen haben es natürlich auch in der Hand, etwas daran zu ändern. Wie uns das gelingt, darüber beraten internationale Expertinnen und Experten beim diesjährigen High-Level Political Forum der Vereinten Nationen. Und der Druck ist groß, denn da ist schon ein bisschen Zeitdruck zu handeln. Viele Ideen liegen natürlich auch auf dem Tisch, wie wir das Klima besser schützen, wie wir den Verlust der Biodiversität aufhalten oder auch eine CO2-neutrale Energieversorgung aufbauen können. Die Ideen und Innovationen müssen aber in der breiten Praxis ankommen. Und das muss jetzt der Schwerpunkt sein. Zugleich brauchen wir auch einen langen Atem. Klimaschutz ist ein Marathon. Der wirklich schwierige Teil auf dem Weg zur Klimaneutralität liegt, wenn wir ehrlich sind, noch vor uns. Und ich bin froh, dass sich das Forum mit diesen Fragen intensiv beschäftigt. Vielen Dank an alle, die sich daran beteiligen. Solche Gespräche kosten zwar Zeit, aber am Ende beschleunigen sie den Prozess der Transformation, die wir brauchen und in der wir ja auch bereits mittendrin stecken. Deutschland bringt sich als ein starker Partner ein. Die Bundesregierung fördert viele Projekte, um die Nachhaltigkeitsziele der Vereinten Nationen in die Welt zu setzen. Ich nenne als Beispiel unsere Förderung für den grünen Wasserstoff. Wir bündeln unsere Kräfte, wir beziehen alle ein, die wir brauchen, damit wir diese Technologie auch im Alltag nutzen können. Diejenigen, die Wasserstoff erzeugen, diejenigen, die ihn speichern und verteilen, diejenigen, die ihn für die Stahlproduktion oder auch für den Fahrzeugantrieb einsetzen möchten. Und so bringen wir damit eine nachhaltige Wasserstofftechnologie zur Anwendung. Das Klimaschutzpotenzial von grünem Wasserstoff ist riesig und zugleich auch das Marktpotenzial. Denn neben der Frage, wie wir leben, steht natürlich auch immer die Frage, wovon wir in Zukunft leben. Nachhaltigkeit ist eine große Chance für Innovation und Wettbewerbsfähigkeit. Und damit ist sie ein doppelter Gewinn für eine lebenswerte Zukunft. Gut, dass Sie sich dafür engagieren und dafür meinen ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Yeah, one thing is certain: to drive innovation and change the future, that is relying on teamwork. We need to scale up or to team up on a bigger scale across borders, countries, stakeholders, generations, disciplines, and so on. And that's why I'm very delighted with the lineup of our panel today that I'm about to introduce to you in just a second. Before, let me invite and encourage you to not only lean back and watch, but to get involved as much as possible. We have opened the chat function for you so that you can submit your questions, comments and remarks also for our following Q&A session. And now it's time to meet our expert panelists. From Berlin in Germany, we are joined by Barbara Diehl, responsible for partnerships with science and business at the German Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation. From Potsdam, just around the corner from Berlin, we are joined by the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Welcome, Professor Johan Rockström. Good morning, America. It's only 5 a.m. in Tucson, and we are joined by Professor Cherry Murray, Professor for Physics at the University of Arizona. Welcome on board. And Godot Sverige from Sweden, we are joined today as well by Dr. Åsa Persson. She is the Research Director and Deputy Director at the Stockholm Environment Institute. Welcome. From Dresden, again in Germany, we are joined today by Christian von Olshausen. He is the Chief Technology Officer of Sunfire, a world-leading industrial electrolysis company. And last but absolutely not least, representing our hosting federal ministry today, live from Bonn, the Director General Provision for the Future, Basic Research and Research for Sustainable Development, Volker Rieke. Ladies, gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and honor to have all of you on the panel today. Let's directly have a look at the results from our poll. And first, of course, I asked our audience to get to know them a bit better about their background. This is your audience today. And then I asked the decisive question: can we achieve and reach the Agenda 2030 goals with the green innovations we already have and know about, or do we need more? And this is the result. All right, 60% are sure that we need much more green research and innovation. 19% still think we need more. I think that's quite a nice result. Dr. Persson, with your expertise as an advisor for the UN on the progress of the SDGs, does this result surprise you?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this talk as a member of the independent group of scientists to write the next Global Sustainable Development Report. I am surprised, yes and no, and actually to those at the far end there saying that actually we do have enough innovative solutions. I would say that I can understand this impatience. I think a lot of the problems we see are about rollout and deployment. And it was a really interesting report last year from Systemic called the Paris Effect that looked at particularly climate solutions, climate innovations, and it found that actually already today, we have low carbon niche technologies covering 3/4 of global emissions. And by 2030, if we move in the right direction, those technologies would be cost competitive, available at mass markets. So from that perspective, it does seem like it's more about effective deployment, creating the right market conditions. On the other hand, of course, if we look at the full scope of Agenda 2030, all the 17 SDGs, there are many goals there that address really persistent social and economic problems. And the UN Secretary General's annual progress report released this week show that we are actually going in the wrong direction now after the pandemic. Progress has stalled or even reverted on things like inequality, carbon emissions. Quite shockingly, extreme poverty is increasing. This has been quite unthinkable now for a couple of decades. So definitely a lot more innovation is needed. I think a very important question here is, can green innovation also address these social and economic dimensions, the full agenda? And I assume this is what we're going to discuss.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your introductory statement. And Professor Murray, you have also been appointed to support the UN Technology Facilitation Mechanism. Does this result also reflect your opinion and the opinion of your previous speaker?
Hello, and thank you for inviting me as well. As a new member of the newest 10-member group for the Technology Facilitation Mechanism, I agree with Dr. Persson that it looks like we have many solutions and we need a lot of deployment, but the solutions for the social poverty, good work for all, and biodiversity loss are not there. So we need many more innovations, not just technologies, but also in business models and social innovations, and particularly working on inequality.
Okay, thank you so much. Professor Rockström, from a scientist's point of view, I guess you also agree that we do need more green innovations?
Yes, well, I think it was very reassuring with the poll here that 2/3 of the participants agree that we need more green innovations. And I follow Cherian and Åsa here that, you know, when we look at the coming decade, we have 9 years to cut the global emissions by half. This is nothing less than 6% decline of emissions per year. It's a COVID-19 pace that now has to be done without destroying the economy, without losing all the jobs. It has to be a transformation in line with Cherry's point. It's not only technologies that are part of what I would call the new definition of green innovation. It is innovations in the system transitions. We're talking about gradual, massive scale of redesign of the whole industrial metabolism to circular business models, of urban design, of construction areas. We must start transitioning the global food system across the whole value chain from being the single largest source of greenhouse gases to becoming a sink of greenhouse gases. So it's really a green innovation journey. The challenge is, just as Åsa pointed out, that carbon is not the only area of focus. We need to have a strong focus on the stability of all the life support systems and the resilience in the Earth system. So we see what's happening now in British Columbia with abrupt heat waves of such an enormous magnitude, which cannot be explained by global warming alone, but which can only be explained if you look at interactions with the jet stream, with the Arctic melt. And these kind of interactions mean that we are in such an urgency point that green innovation must take a new, kind of say, a new broader focus in investments and in scale.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mrs. Deere, you are our expert on entrepreneurship. Are green innovations a hot topic and popular enough amongst startups and ambitious entrepreneurs?
Oh, I can only say that this is certainly the case. I think entrepreneurs do tend to venture where there are opportunities. And I do think there's a tremendous momentum in the whole green innovation sector, because, you know, civil society, business and government are all proclaiming that there's a need for action and that we need to, you know, change our consumption habits and our industrial manufacturing processes at a large scale. So this is where the momentum is. I I do think that entrepreneurial opportunities will arise from that. And whereas opportunity, there will always be people who are ready to seize them. The question is where? I mean, globally, will they be in Europe? Will they be in the US? Will they be in China? Where will they, or will they be in Africa or Latin America? I think this is a question that we as a nation, or even as a entity in Europe, need to ask ourselves, like, how do we create the best possible framework condition that all those all those people who are eager to solve these problems are actually also doing it and creating that value on our shores rather than somewhere else.
All right, Mr. von Olshausen, you are an ambitious entrepreneur, by far not a startup anymore, and you are based in Germany. As a founder, you then decided to put all your effort into green innovations. And are the SDGs a framework for your still company innovation strategy?
Well, our company's vision is a world without fossil fuels. Very simple. And if you look at SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, at SDG 9, industry, innovation, infrastructure, and SDG 13, climate action, it's a combination of those three which result in our vision and also our daily work. What we want to do is we want to develop and supply and operate electrolyzers that turn electric energy from renewable sources into hydrogen or other fuels that are also required on our way to a climate neutral industry and economy and life in total. Of course, this is affordable and clean energy in the industry, driven by innovation to foster climate action. So definitely these SDGs are relevant for us, but they are not relevant because we see them as relevant. The economy, also the industry, and we as a startup, also as a grown-up now, we can also follow. We can only follow what the policies provide as a market. And therefore, these SDGs are very important to set the framework for policy making worldwide. If this happens, then we will also have a chance to deploy our actions into industrial reality. And therefore, these SDGs are very important, but they are not directly connected to us. It's more an indirect connection via policy making from global decision makers.
Interesting. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Mr. Rieke, from the perspective of our hosting federal ministry, of course, in its role as a promoter for research and innovation, how do you rate our polling results?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dure. First of all, I agree with all the other panelists. I think it's not really surprising what comes out of the Slido poll. I think the SDGs are quite ambitious, as mentioned before. The time schedule up to 2030, when we want to have reached the SDGs, is a quite short scale, where it's very ambitious for all stakeholders, for all countries who take efforts to reach this goal, to be at the end successful. But I want to pinpoint a little bit the positive aspects. I think green innovation is really a growing trend. Nobody is discussing about is it needed or not. So there is a lot of awareness with regard to all stakeholders in policy, in industry, in civil society. So I think there is a good movement. There's a good momentum now, and I think we have to use this, and we have, of course, work hard to reach the SDGs in 2030. It's clear we don't discuss, do we need to take action? We know that action is needed. Time to act is now. So I think it's urgent, as others said, and now we have to find the right ways to achieve these goals and to set the right course right now. From my perspective, we urgently require new options, we require problem-solving skills, we require new technologies, and we need some sort of new culture of innovation for sustainability, ranging from community experimentation spaces to high-tech laboratories. I think the corona pandemic showed well that if there is such a challenge to find a vaccine, it was impressive to see with the efforts in industry and science how quickly we reached to have a vaccine on the market and vaccine to help the people. So I think we need this common movement of all stakeholders, from policy, industry, civil society, that should work together to reach these SDGs is worthwhile. And from my perspective, of course, the research and innovation are central levers for sustainable development. The federal government's sustainability development strategy highlights this importance. And at the BMBF, at the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, we are highly committed to supporting vital innovations by funding new green technologies, such as green hydrogen, for example, and by strengthening mission-oriented approaches in the innovation system, as well as social innovations, participation, and of course, education.
Thank you very much. Well, during these next 30 minutes, give or take, we would like to shed some light on the path we are on right now. What challenges do we have to overcome? What obstacles or even potholes can we expect along the way? What will help us further? Not only solutions, of course, but also prerequisites, tools, actions that are required to approach and then eventually reach our sustainability goals. And how do we manage not only to get there, but to get there in time? It's little time left, as you already just mentioned. So which drivers and accelerators do we have available, or do we need to create? And first, I would like to stop by with the status quo of the progress. What are the challenges we need to approach first on a German level, a European level, and a global level? And as mentioned before, Dr. Persson, you have been nominated, or you are a part of the GSDR group, one out of only 15 scientists worldwide to inform about the progress of the SDGs. So how do you rank the current state of progress, and what are the biggest challenges we need to tackle and overcome right now to get started?
Well, that's really a million-dollar question. But someone said here that the SDGs are, of course, very ambitious. So not surprisingly, there is a huge gap to actually achieve them. This was the assessment of the previous Global Sustainable Development Report. And now we can expect some aspects of that gap to have grown even larger. As I mentioned, that we have seen some reversals of progress, some long-term negative trends, actually mainly on the environment-related SDGs. Coupling that with this shocking image again of extreme poverty rising in parts of the world. And I think even if, and this is, I think, quite hard to grasp, sitting in Germany or Sweden like me, we don't really kind of see this reality. And even if it's very sort of locally concentrated, these really growing social and economic problems and inequalities, they of course could have cascading effects in global society. Growing social unrest, political difficulties. It's going to be harder for these places to attract capital and sort of innovation capacity, eroding fiscal space, growing debts. So these could easily become really negative spirals. And of course, it has an impact on the climate transition or sustainability transformation at large in terms of who is in and who is out. So I guess the concern is really, are we going to see a growing gap here? And I think another really interesting eye-opening report was on the geopolitics of the energy transition a couple of years ago, where they were plotting, you know, who has this innovation capacity, the renewable energy patents, for example. And of course, there you have really the leading countries. So my fear is that this gap is just going to grow wider.
which of course would be a problem. Yes, thank you so much. Professor Murray, you are one out of 10 scientists appointed as an advisor directly by the UN Secretary General. How do you rate the green innovation landscape right now, and what needs to be done right now as well?
Okay, well, I am more optimistic than Dr. Persson. Since 5 years ago, when I was at the US Department of Energy, I see that the landscape is improving considerably. And that is because not just the developed countries, US, Germany, Europe, China, are focused on this, as Minister Rika said, but there's a cross UN technology facilitation mechanism really focused on innovation. And I see much more innovation in the global South, much more than I saw 5 years ago. So indeed, Dr. Persson is right. We could have a growing divide, but I see innovation ecosystems growing across the world. Large companies and governments need to help. Specifically, we need a rollout of technologies. They need to scale up. And small companies will have a very hard time reducing costs and scaling up to the entire world. South-South collaborations are picking up and doing well. So I am optimistic. Thank you.
That is good to hear. Thank you so much. Professor Rockström, from a German or Germany's point of view, which areas have a particular need for green innovations, and what distinguishes green from conventional innovations from your point of view?
Yeah, thanks. Two challenging questions. Let me start on the first question by basically agreeing with Harike from BMBF that we're talking about innovations across all sectors in society. I mean, we know that is a prerequisite to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and to have any chance of landing the Paris Climate Agreement. I'd also like to emphasize, basically based on Åsa's and Cherry's points again, that we're all in this together, that this is a world transformation, north, south, east, west, all geographies at the same time. I think there is quite a lot of evidence to suggest that we have three particular areas of concern in need of rapid green innovation. The first one, and also from a German perspective, by the way, I mean, the number one, which is the most challenging, is the food transformation, which is very challenging for Germany, for Europe, and for the world. That we must recognize that the single largest emitter of greenhouse gases, the single largest cause of loss of biodiversity, the single largest consumer of fresh water, the single largest user of fertilizer and thereby over polluting waterways with nitrogen and phosphorus is agriculture, the whole value chain. And of course, Germany, as a very leading producer of livestock and with a very rich culture on food, both import and export, must recognize that now is the time to really take on like the bull by the horn with regard to the transition to a zero carbon, resilient, sustainable food system, equally important as the German discussion on the co-commission and the Klimapaket and the 65% reduction in emissions by 2030. The second one is, of course, the transport sector. And here Germany is a leading actor in the world, both on heavy transport with companies like Daimler, but also, of course, being such a driver and leader on personal mobility from Mercedes, BMW, Audi, Porsche, etc. And here we have a race right now, which is really exciting to see the electrification and moving so fast on that competitive innovation pathway. And I foresee that Germany will be potentially almost like a decisive tipping point decider with regards to what happens with mobility in Europe and thereby also spilling over into the world. I think it's incredibly exciting that the heavy truck industry in Europe, led by Daimler, has agreed on phasing out the internal combustion engine by 2040. In just 20 years' time, no more trucks being produced in Europe based on diesel or gasoline. And finally, the construction sector. I think the European Union and Germany can be a leader in moving away from concrete and steel towards more biomass-based carbon capturing technologies. The whole Bauhaus initiative by Ursula von der Leyen and the European Commission, with Germany right at the center. So these are three really important areas. How to distinguish green from conventional innovations? I would define green innovations in the following way: zero carbon, zero loss of nature, and zero material waste and pollutants. That is the charge. And of course, there is a scale here, but essentially everything that doesn't meet those three criteria would be continuous conventional innovation.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, of course, we want to have a look at what can help us further, what can research and innovation do here. And to stick to the agricultural terms a little longer, this is a bit the chicken and egg question. So how do we give research and innovation a push towards more sustainability, or trigger the innovative spirit in sustainability, or ideally both? Dr. Persson, how can we do so?
I think I see four key issues here. I'm sure others have other ideas and additional ones working in this innovation space. But I think someone already mentioned mission thinking. We already see that in Europe, not least. I would like to see more structured dialogue on missions from different parts of the world. You know, how does the European missions fit with the African Union's missions, for example? To have a bit more international cooperation in that space. A second one, when we look at the whole objective and why we innovate, is of course to focus not on products per se, but services and functions to really nurture that circular economy that was mentioned. I think we see some interesting examples with electric vehicles. It's not just the car, the diesel-free car, but it's also the business model, leasing, carpooling, etc. So diesel-free mobility, really. A third point I'd like to make is on the process of innovation, having that early assessment of whether innovations are indeed green, like Johan said. Do they address a fuller set of SDGs, social and economic ones? Can they prevent a rebound effect? And also have behavioral science, of course, inform as early as possible. This is something we have seen in our research at SDI on clean cook stoves, for example, that the technological innovation is sometimes not enough. You really need to understand also potential barriers for uptake. And the final one, the big one, shifting from innovation to deployment, of course, governments taking a really clear lead, de-risking investment. I think a very interesting example here is the production of green steel, where governments, including the Swedish government, has funded innovation and then also create the market through public procurement contracts. Potentially down the line, we will see product standards that really set in legally sort of encode these expectations on green innovation. So a range of issues there.
Okay, and of course the best innovation won't help us further if it's not known, accepted, implemented. So Mrs. Deal, how can a green innovation become economically and also societally successful? What special criteria does it need to meet?
Well, it may sound a little bit prosaic, but in order for it to be taken up, it really needs to solve a problem that a lot of people have, and also realize that this problem needs to be solved. So any kind of green innovation, like any innovation per se, needs to present and needs to be a viable alternative to other solutions that are out there that potential tackle the problem. So, I mean, there are very, very few problems in this world that aren't solved somehow, either directly or indirectly by people creating workarounds and how to somehow deal with it. So I think it really needs to address a need, and people need to realize that they have this need and that they need a solution for that. And that's the only prerequisite that you have to fulfill, which may sound very, I mean, it may sound very, very simple if you phrase it that way. but it is very, very hard to implement because people are very reluctant to change behavior generally. So if if an entrepreneurial student comes to me and says, I'm gonna, my solution is gonna change people's behavior, I'm always getting a little bit wary because behavior change is a complex, is a very complex thing to achieve, and it relies on a lot of different drivers and motivations and environments, which are shaped by individual preferences, by certain ways of doing things, by processes, by established mechanisms, etc. So I think to come up and saying like one innovation is gonna fix all that is a little bit naive. So I think we need to create an environment where we let different solutions come forth, where we define a challenge, or we define a problem that needs to be solved, and create an environment where different solutions can come forth to that, and then look at how these solutions can then actually create and arise and be taken up by a variety of players, and therefore develop that impact that they need to have in order to change things at a larger scale.
Okay, so it's the old pain versus desire question. Otherwise, we will not change our behavior, of course. But time is ticking as well. And Professor Murray, who is needed most from your perspective to really push green innovation and to bring it forward?
Well, I would say we need governments, industry, and civil society all at the same time. Mrs. Deal is right. We're not going to solve a problem if we don't think it's a problem. And civil society needs to bring the problems to both government and industry as shareholders, as citizens, invent new social innovations, invent NGOs, in particular young people who see the world not going in the right direction for them. Industry needs to scale up and lower costs, and also to be incredibly inventive in terms of new business models. And governments need to provide incentives. Many of the things that Professor Rockström was saying need to be incentivized by governments. So I'd say all of them. And the more we understand that we do have a problem and we do have needs, and they can be satisfied by applying technology and solutions, the faster we will get there.
Okay, so government, industry, civil society. Professor Rockström, if you had to choose one, which one would you pick? In first instance, at least.
You won't get me to pick one, because I so wholeheartedly agree with Cherry, actually, that we have to hold hands. I would actually add one, if I may. I would put the scientific community there as well. I think we have a responsibility to engage. I see some really positive breakthroughs here. I mean, 20 years back, Åsa Persson and myself, we were struggling very much in the science policy interface only. Now the scientific community works so much more active with the business community. I think it's a real drive on innovation from business. And therefore, I think what's so exciting right now is that the whole narrative on sustainability is changing from the old reducing environmental impacts and trade-offs and sacrifice to a narrative of equity and prosperity and success and modernity, that sustainability is like the entry point for the next development in our journey as a modern society. And I think that is something that automatically engages multiple stakeholders.
Okay, thank you very much. And of course, you're always welcome to add more parties, because it's relying on teamwork, as I said in the beginning. Mr. Rieke, what specific measures is Germany in general and your federal ministry in particular taking already to promote green innovations? I think you're muted. Perfect.
Sorry. There are a lot of ongoing activities. And let me start by explaining that our understanding at the BMBF is that we want to play an important role in shaping our future with our measures, with the measures of the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, with the measures for sustainable innovation. We want to lay the foundation for a viable future. And there are two aspects, I think, that where we put the focus on two really important things that we want to strengthen to reach these goals. First is innovation, and second is basic knowledge. It's important as well, these two focal points of the BMBF funding strategy. We have launched last year the so-called FONA strategy for research for sustainable development. That means we are investing 4 billion euro in research for sustainability. I think this is an impressive figure. If you look back, you see this tremendous increase of funding efforts that the Federal Ministry, that politics is going to undertake. But it's not just this. As coordinator for sustainability in my ministry, I'm very happy. Personally, I'm proud that we reached to influence, that we reached to strengthen the sustainability aspect as well in other BMBF funding programs. So it's not just a question of my directorate that deals with sustainability questions, it's also a question of the whole innovation funding measures of the ministry, of all the other programs of my ministry, where the aspects of sustainability are being strengthened in the last decade, I would like to say. I would like to mention two examples with the funding measure on plastic recycling technologies. For example, the BMBF is funding innovative research to enhance plastic recycling technologies while ensuring their integration within the value chain as a whole. I think a very important mission that we started years ago. I think circular economy is a key element of sustainable economic system. Another example, the national bioeconomy strategy. It has been mentioned before, the need for transition in the agriculture sector. With this strategy, the BMBF supports this transition towards sustainable agriculture. And recently, just to mention this, the BMBF, a lot of other things that I could mention as well, but I want to focus a little bit. Recently, the BMBF also worked together with the UNESCO to host the World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, because we attach great importance to integrating sustainability skills at all levels of education. I think these examples show clearly that the BMBF want to foster a culture of innovation for sustainability.
Thank you very much. Mr. von Olshausen, your company is developing green solutions and doing so very successfully. Named Global Cleantech 100 company 6 years in a row. Congratulations on that. And you're in the very fortunate position to be backed by leading strategic and financial investors. So please tell us a bit more about your company's success story and also the lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what is very important is that we don't divide the industry into an evil and an uneven sector. Everybody needs to learn that change is required, and there are very powerful organizations who are able to develop, produce, operate, and also strategically develop systems. And the large industry is a key player in order to do two things at the same time. First one is keep quality of life high. And secondly, transform the way we produce and consume. And therefore, it is important to make partnerships or create partnerships between those who have the ideas how to transform and those who have the power to then really deploy it on large scale. And that was probably one of the key drivers for Sunfire. It has always been the key driver to firstly have shareholders that are in the so-called old economy. If you look into our shareholder board, there are many companies in there who have earned a lot of money by producing a lot of CO2, but we were the consumers in the end. Yeah, we as people were the consumers. But they made very early decisions to say, okay, we want to have this transformation, and they joined us because they felt that we were not putting those into a sort of evil sector, but sort of enabling them to transform into companies that create value on a sustainable way. And then the second key has always been to generate revenues together with such companies, with first demonstration products, and not only staying in the lab. Go out there, build machines, put them into industrial environments, and show that this works together with those companies. So after all, it's about partnering with those who can do it and persuading that it works, because just on paper, it doesn't work. You need to go into practice, but together with those people. And I think this was one of the main success drivers for us. And there's still a long way to go, because it is, in the past, it was always demonstration, the field of innovation, and I probably come later to that a little bit, but the field of innovation and the field of industrialization are two different fields. The high impact zone is the latter one, and that's still the one that we need to tackle.
Okay, interesting. Thank you so much. Okay, now we of course need to speed things up, not only with our discussion, but also when it comes to green innovations and sustainability goals. So in other words, Mrs. Deal, how can we speed up the scale up of green innovations? Which general conditions do we have to have in place?
Well, I mean, for any kind of invention or solution that you have devised for a problem or for addressing a need, I think in order for it to really become big and become and get to scale, I think you need to look at a framework of 6 preconditions. One is there a market? So are there enough people out there who are willing to spend money and resources on purchasing the solution that I have devised? Secondly is kind of management. So do I have all the right skills and competencies in my team that I need to make this successful, and do I have access to the necessary talent? Number 3 is, yes, is there some certain inherent risk in the technology or in the solution that I have devised that could potentially cause it to fail in whichever way? Number 4 is, do I have access to the right capital and to let's say the financial resources that I need in order to get this to a level and to a kind of a scalable outfit. And then number 5 is, what does the regulatory environment look like? Do I have, as far as government regulations and market regulations, do I have a good kind of prerequisite of factors that allow me to actually take this to the next level of growth? And then lastly, that's the thing that might be a little bit connected to the team element, to the skills and competences. Do I have a mindset in society, but also in the company that I'm trying to get to scale, that really wanted to grow and wanted to be successful? Do I have the motivation and the ambition among the people that I work with, among my investors, among the people that I need to get on board that allow me to get this, to make this big? So all of this is a very complex interplay. And especially with, you know, the kind of breakthrough innovations that we're looking at the agency, I do think, as far as the regulatory environment is concerned, I think we do still need to improve things there. I think we're not leveraging the public procurement power to its greatest effect as far as it comes to actually adopting, especially novel and green innovations, sustainable innovations in all areas. I think we're still sort of guided too much by less. We're so keen on not wasting taxpayers' money, which is great, which is a good position to start with, but it's kind of in a position where it creates a tension between, on the one hand side, buying the cheapest, and that at the other side buying the greenest or buying the most sustainable. And there are a whole host of other kind of regulatory conditions that I do think need to be improved for more companies, for more ventures, for more entrepreneurial ideas to actually come to fruition.
Okay, quite a list, a lot of boxes to tick, and but it's good. It's good that we talk about it and that we start here and now. And Mr. Roshausen, you touched this topic before, the way or the journey from science to business, from an idea to a product-ready innovation. If I'm informed correctly, you were still working for an American multinational consumer goods corporation when you started Sunfire, not as a company yet, but as a project. So can you take us on this journey with you once more, this way from the idea to where you are right now?
Okay, yeah, we started in 2008 thinking about how to make fuel, but just a bit differently. There's always this hydrogen economy, which is great, which shall happen. And also the way of electrification for those things that can be electrified is always good because direct electrification has many advantages in terms of efficiency. But let's get back to the question. What we sort of felt in 2008 was there is a need also with large amount of electrification and large amount of hydrogen for liquid fuels, for aviation, also in terrestrial traffic, but also in the chemical industry. There will be a large amount of need. And if you can turn water into hydrogen, why not turn water and CO2 into electric fuels? We started doing this, and then we built a plant here which was able to make those synthetic fuels. What we then understood better was it's not only about, the key thing is not the change from hydrogen or from water and CO2 into liquid fuels, but really to link the chemical and the electric world with a device which is called electrolysis. And once we had understood this, we did more than before what I was talking about earlier. We joined forces together with the existing industry. They mainly giving money and strategic ideas, and us sort of having the technological capability of building this. And we took this further by again and again placing those prototypes and industrial demo projects into industrial environments and testing them. Also having, of course, a lot of pain with those early stage projects because it didn't work as they should and so on. But from that, we learned very much on what is required in order to not only do innovation in the lab, because innovation in the lab is always comparably easy. If you compare it to its demonstration industrial environment, it's not only about the key core technology working, but it's also about how to deploy it, how to finance it, how to meet with certification and legal requirements and so on. And that's what I meant a bit earlier. The industrial deployment of what we want to do now is something which is still a large challenge and cannot only overcome by innovation. Innovation is great, but a sustainable life requires, let me put it a bit differently. It was said earlier by Ms. Steele, I think. You have to feel the pain of not living sustainably. And if you don't do that, you will not feel the urgency to change into this sustainable life. And that's probably what Sunfire has understood quite early, that we need to join forces. But what we are now waiting for, and that will be a serious impact factor on the success of this whole industry, not only Sunfire, is that policymakers really provide the legal framework for business models that require sustainability and not forbid, but make unsustainability expensive enough that you choose sustainable life. And in Sunfire, we've always done two things. We've developed technology, we've tested it in real environments, but secondly, we also spent a lot of money and effort on talking to those decision makers. And if you ask me what has been the greater challenge, creating the public awareness or solving the technology problem, the world will not and never fail because we cannot solve the technology problem. But it will, if we fail, we will fail because we don't take the right decisions at an early point of time. And therefore, it's not only about innovation, it's also about the public decision in order to go for an industrial rollout. And that requires a policy framework. And that's something which is not only in our hands anymore. Technology was. And therefore, I'm really hoping that such discussions here force us all into making the right decisions for business models to work sustainably.
Thank you very much for those honest insights. Really appreciate. So, Professor Rockström, do you agree, or what do you think has the best chance to speed things up, to help startups, to help ambitious entrepreneurs, and also the society's mindset? Is it a private and public investment on the one side? Is it positive incentives rather than legal framework, target setting, networks? What's most promising for you from your point of view?
And I think what Christian Olshausen shares here is incredibly important and kind of reinforces even further Barbara Deal's point as well. And I mean, just to give that in a broader perspective, I mean, I find it quite remarkable today that renewable, sustainable solutions in sector after sector after sector are starting to reach parity and competitiveness on markets, despite the fact that the unsustainable solutions are being subsidized by the atmosphere, subsidized by the planet, that we are not having a fair competition on the market because we're not factoring in the true price of everything that is damaging the climate, damaging biodiversity, damaging water, damaging all our life support systems. So it's quite remarkable that we've come so far already today. If we do what both Barbara and Christian is suggesting, to internalize the externalities, putting a global price on carbon, you know perhaps that the social sciences indicates that the true social cost of carbon already today is roughly 150 euros per ton of carbon dioxide. And if you would apply 150 euros, which is the true cost of carbon today, you would immediately, of course, make Christian Olshausen and Sunfire a massive competitive investment. And so it goes for basically all innovations in the energy space today. And you can see that if you just think of putting a price on soils or price on biodiversity, how you can, adjust. So on your question, the public sector must come in. I mean, the private sector is ready to go. As Christian says, the innovations will come if you just give the right incentive space. So I think putting the right regulatory framework, putting the right end dates on unsustainable technologies, setting science-based targets like net zero world economy by 2050, the landing zone for climate, that's the way to go. And now we're seeing, I mean, as you see, the Zero Carbon Finance Alliance with over 40 of the largest financial institutions in the world have stepped on board. They are saying no more investments in let's call it the black investment schemes that we've seen over the decades. So I think we're right at that turning point now, but we need many more public efforts here, and I think that's where BMBF and the German Bund, the German government, is so important to lead the way, because this is the fourth largest economy in the world. So here we have, a pointer in the direction for the world.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Persson, what kind of teamwork is the most promising one from your perspective? What collaborations, corporations, and networks do you believe in the most?
Well, I would say what I think is really most important is an international collaboration. Coming back to my point there about sort of trying to, as much as we can, reduce the inequality gaps that the world is facing and make sure that this sustainability transformation does not further widen them. So I think it's very positive, of course, that this global green race is on and excellent to hear that Germany is really kind of trying to be a leader in that. But let's look at the geography of innovation capacity. And I think also what's really important there is that science diplomacy and innovation, partnerships, collaboration have many positive side effects as well when it comes to international cooperation, multilateralism, and global prosperity at large.
Awesome, thank you. Professor Murray, international corporations, multidisciplinary collaborations, intergenerational networks, what would you suggest, or all of them?
I would say all of them. International because, as Professor Rockström said, this is needed. Solutions are local, but the actual problems are global. So, for example, in the area of food and agriculture, desertification is a major problem. Dry land agriculture is key to many of our planet's problems. And it must be solved. It is a technical, but also a very social problem. So I would add multi-sector partnerships. That is to say public-private partnerships. As we have heard, it is incredibly important to set the stage and the regulatory, let's just say, price on carbon, price on putting plastics in the ocean. Let's bring the externalities into actual business and we'll get a lot of solutions, but they need to be international. And I will also point out large and small companies working together, as we've heard, is incredibly important because these solutions need to be scaled up. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rieke, what role is international cooperation playing for Germany when it comes to fostering and bringing forward and promoting green innovations?
Yeah, it has been said before. I think achieving sustainability is a global responsibility. So international cooperation is therefore key to a successful transformation towards sustainability. And the BMBF strives to be a strong and a reliable partner and supports this process with a large number of projects and cooperation. We have launched an internalization strategy some years ago. And there are, of course, two aspects. It's a cooperation within the European framework, the European research area, which is quite important. There are a lot of questions with regard to common research projects, as well as regulations that should successfully be done on the European level. And then, of course, we cooperate global responsibility, global challenge. So we cooperate with the whole world, I would like to say. There are a lot of cooperation tools. There are a lot of cooperation agreements in place with all countries around the world. I would just mention, to make it a little bit concrete, I would just mention some of them. We are supporting, for example, those African countries that are affected the most by climate change in setting up science structures in these countries. We have worked together with countries in Western as well as in Southern Africa to establish 2 regional science service centers for climate change and sustainable land management. In cooperation with German research institutions, these centers explore and they test solutions for adapting land management to climate change. And of course, one other aspect, I always underline the aspect of education. Moreover, these centers train the next generation of local researchers. I think a very promising project. Another with regard to hydrogen, we launched a national hydrogen strategy last year. And of course, this has a dimension, a national dimension, it has a European dimension, and it has a global and international dimension. We, for example, initiated a so-called Atlas of Green Hydrogen Potentials to look to have an overview where it makes sense that BMBF is working together with international partners to analyze whether and how hydrogen can be generated and exported. Just 2 examples for the international aspect of sustainability policy. It's obvious that it plays an important role, and we are working very hard on it.
Thank you very much. I just had a look at my tablet here, and questions from the audience keep coming in. Thank you so much for that and for your contribution here. Unfortunately, we'll probably not have time for a Q&A session, but nothing will be lost. Everything will be used for the follow-up of the event. But we would like to once more have your opinion and your evaluation, and therefore we will start one more poll via Slido. So in case you're watching full screen, close the full screen mode for a little moment, and then underneath the video you will find Slido again. This time it's a multiple choice, and you can pick 3 out of 6 options. And the question is, what do you believe, in which areas are more sustainable innovations needed the most? Is it human well-being and capabilities, social justice, and or climate action and energy transition, circular economy? D would be sustainable building and the transformation of transport. Then we have sustainable agricultural and food systems, and last but not least, pollutant-free environment. So let's see what's on your top 3 list. We give you a little longer, and then we will have a look at the results together. Okay, can we have the results? I think it was quite a race up there. Let's have a look at the results. There you go. Sustainable agriculture and food systems with 68%. Then second comes in climate action, energy transition, and circular economy, almost together with sustainable building and transformation of transport. Okay, thank you so much. With that in mind, time's almost up, not only for our panel discussion, but also for our beautiful planet Earth. If we don't act now, no time to waste. So to our ladies and gentlemen, expert panelists, how and where shall we start? Your final statement, please, your call for action. Mrs. Deal, let me start with you.
Okay, sorry, I'm muting. I would definitely start with allowing more experimentation in general with regards to public-private partnerships in order to make sure that that we create the best framework conditions for innovative solutions to actually be developed and tried out.
Thank you very much. Dr. Persson, where to begin with?
So I think around 11% of new patents are environment related. So this raised the question of what about the other 89%? This is the OECD average. So I think Mr. Rieke made a very important point, the need to integrate sustainability across the board. It's great we have the green leaders like Mr. Olshausen, but also look at the economy at large and innovation at large.
Thank you so much. Professor Rockström, your final statement and takeaways?
Well, the latest assessments is that we have $17 trillion put on the table for COVID-19 recovery. Of that, an estimated 2.5 trillion is today aligned from green recovery. And among those green recovery trillions, it's only a fraction, which is beyond just reducing pollution. So I think the number one task is to align all the 17 with green innovation.
Thank you very much. Professor Murray, you agree?
Well, I certainly agree with that last statement by Professor Rockström. But I would say, let us focus these green trillions on solutions through a lens of equity, and that includes intergenerational equity.
You got a thumb up from Professor Rockström as well. Thank you. Mr. van Olshausen, what's your top wishing list item?
Yeah, my top wishing list is that we get policies that make every person decide for a sustainable way of life, and then those 70 trillion or however, whatever it is, and even if it was more or less, would all go into sustainable innovation and deployment. And I want to say at this point, which I forgot, but it's really important, I don't want to be unthankful or ungrateful, because the atmosphere of innovation in this field is really great, and the BMBF has done a great job in the past 2 decades to really foster this. I want to say this here, because we've largely benefited from this atmosphere. But now it's a matter of the deployment, and the deployment is after the innovation, and that's something that the BMBF can support. It's not in their hands anymore, and therefore there are more people to be involved that this happens now.
Thank you so much. And besides that, Mr. Rieke, what are your key takeaways from today's panel discussion?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's obvious that we've seen that sustainable innovations are really necessary for a global sustainable development. And research and education are necessary to develop a culture of sustainable innovation and to shape sustainable transformation. So I think this is a task and a challenge that the politics have to fulfill. And the BMBF with regard to funding, not just funding, but also influencing the right regulations, influencing society awareness for sustainable solutions. I think this is a thing where we have to focus on in the years to come. So we need to do two things. We need to strengthen sustainable innovations to achieve the Agenda 2030, and we need to strengthen sustainability within the innovation system itself to enable new groundbreaking ideas to surface. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you, our expert panelists, for these profound and diverse and inspiring answers. Also, thank you to you, ladies and gentlemen, for your contribution. We are all in this together. Driving innovation, shaping a better and more sustainable future for all is teamwork. We are in it together, and I strongly believe we are in it to win it. Thank you very much for watching.